You are an ordinary worker on an oil tanker. You are transporting oil from Guam Island to Manila, the capital of the Philippines. It's night, the sea is very calm, the sky has a few clouds, and you are in the middle of the Pacific. Since there is no risk, it's simply your turn to patrol while all your colleagues sleep. You walk around calmly, and suddenly in the dead of night, you see an airplane trail. Within a few seconds, it goes behind a cloud, and boom! You see a huge explosion in the sky, then two burning objects, one larger and one smaller, heading rapidly towards the water. You sound the alarm on the tanker. Everyone is on alert. The captain locates the object 17 miles from the tanker and tries to contact the Coast Guard to report what happened. The company's communication goes unanswered. America does not respond. Guam does not respond. Manila does not respond. It's like the whole world evaporated. The captain decides to steer the tanker towards the area where the object was located, and when they arrive at the point, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Neither in the water, above the water, nor in the sky. Nothing. After the end of World War II, the so-called Cold War was fought more on adjacent fronts, using small nations as shields. In an earlier episode, discussing the consequences of this war, we explained the separation between the two Koreas, and that it was essentially a conflict, more or less direct, between the USA and the USSR. A similar masked war was fought in Vietnam. The famous Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975 was a clash between Russia on the side of North Vietnam and the United States on the side of South Vietnam. However, for many years, the United States did not acknowledge its involvement in the conflict at all. Furthermore, to avoid drawing attention, all American military troops, along with ammunition, were sent to Vietnam via charter flights. The planes appeared to be regular passenger flights, but in reality, they carried only soldiers. This was done to avoid raising any questions. There is a lot to be said about this war, but today we are discussing the most mysterious and controversial aviation accident in history, a flight from California to South Vietnam. March 14, 1962, around 0:05 hours GMT, a Lockheed L-1049H aircraft, colloquially known as the Super Constellation, is preparing to depart from Travis Air Force Base in California with a charter flight registered as Flight Tiger Line 739. The final destination is Saigon, South Vietnam. The aircraft is preparing to transport 93 highly trained American soldiers, 3 Vietnamese soldiers, and 11 crew members, an impeccably selected crew with experienced personnel. FT-739 takes off from California with 107 people on board, all with excellent military training and all selected by none other than J.F. Kennedy. The first destination, Honolulu, Hawaii. Shortly after the plane reaches cruising altitude, the crew notices problems with the ignition of engines 1 and 3. The captain tries to resolve the issues from the plane, but cannot fix them in any way. However, being in the middle of the Pacific, he has no choice but to continue the journey with only 2 fully functional engines. After 12 hours of flying with 2 engines, FT-739 lands on the runway at Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu. A special team arrives to refuel the aircraft. The plane is at an American military airbase with a closed perimeter. A team of engineers checks and fixes the problems with the 2 engines. The soldiers on the plane ask the base staff for mattresses to sleep comfortably, as many more hours of flight await them. Loaded with mattresses, supplies, fuel, and repaired, FT-739 prepares to continue its journey after almost 3 hours on the ground. The aircraft has a long journey ahead, with dozens of hours of flying. Therefore, to cross the Pacific, FT-739 will make 4 stops, from California to Honolulu, Hawaii, from Honolulu to Wake Island, Wake, Guam, Guam, Clark Air Force Base, Manila, Philippines, Manila, Saigon, South Vietnam. All these stops are made at American military bases for refueling, possible technical revisions, crew changes, and food procurement. FT-739 takes off for Wake Island After some time, the same problems occur with the same two engines, 1 and 3. The captain continues the journey as he has no other alternative. March 15, 1962, 03:54, GMT, FT-739 lands on the runway at Wake Island Air Force Base. Again, a refueling team and another team of engineers and mechanics appear to fix the engine problems. Since almost 24 hours had passed since the first takeoff, 4 of the steward crew members are changed. A few days later, the 4 who disembarked at Wake Island likely felt that the universe somehow loved them and that they were very lucky. With refueling, repairs and crew changes, FT-739 stays on the ground for about an hour. At the controls of FT-739 is Captain Gregory P. Thomas, 48 years old. He has been employed by Flying Tiger Line since 1950 and has vast experience with many types of aircraft. By this time, Gregory had accumulated 90,500 flight hours, of which 3,562 were on L-1049H aircraft. The first officer and co-pilot is Robert J. Wish, also 48 years old, employed by the company since 1951. By the time of boarding FT-739, Robert had accumulated 17,500 flight hours, 374 of which were on L-1049H aircraft. The second officer is Robbie J. Gazaway, 39 years old. He had been employed by Flying Tiger Line since 1953 and had accumulated 5,500 flight hours, 900 of which were on L-1049H. FT-739 takes off again. The next destination is Guam. The flight proceeds perfectly normally with routine reports from the captain and no incidents. It seems that the problems with engines 1 and 3 have been resolved. 11:14, GMT, FT-739 lands on the runway at Anderson Air Force Base on Guam Island. All crew members decide to disembark to eat something, stretch their legs, and get some fresh air. As usual, a special team arrives with a tanker and refuels the plane. After finishing, the team leaves, and the aircraft remains alone on the runway for about 15 minutes. Then everyone returns on board. Since it was a special military flight, the FT-739 crew also included 2 navigators, specialized in both radar technology and navigation. They were hired on February 13th and 14th, 1962, a month before the FT-739 flight. William T. Kennedy and Grady Reese Burt Jr. Also on board were an aviation engineer and his assistant, respectively, George Michael Now, 38 years old, with 1,235 flight hours on an L-1049H, and assistant Clayton E. McClellan, 33 years old, with 1,095 hours of experience on L-1049H. Keep in mind, time is expressed in universal GMT for easier and more logical tracking. So if I mention something happening at 15 HOW and say it's in the middle of the night, don't think I'm crazy. I'm talking about universal time, not local hours. FT-739 takes off again. The next destination is Manila, Philippines. This flight should last about 6 hours, and the estimated landing time in Manila is 19 hours GMT. The aircraft was fueled for 9.5 hours of flight. One thing I haven't told you until now in any clip of this kind is that on flights over oceans, the pilot transmits his position on the radar every hour to control towers, any special conditions, the remaining fuel, and an estimated landing time. FT-739 maintains communication with 2 ground units, Guam ATC, which has radio transmission but also physically tracks the superconstellation on radar, and Guam International Flight Service Station, or IFSS, which keeps in touch with the flight only by radio. The aircraft can also contact Flying Tiger Line, the company operating the flight. During takeoff, the captain does something unusual. He tells those at Guam to transmit all his positioning data, departure time, fuel, route and so on, and the exact time of departure to California, Manila and Hong Kong. Besides Guam, 3 other units knew exactly that FT-739 had taken off for Manila. Why the captain requested this, we don't know, because the control tower didn't ask for explanations. They transmitted the data, and that was it. About an hour after takeoff, the the captain requests permission from Guam ATC to climb from 10,000 FT altitude to 18,000 FT. Guam ACT grants permission to climb without asking why, and within a few minutes, FT-739 rises. Shortly after, Guam ATC announces the aircraft and other units where the captain had requested to transmit the position that FT-739 is 100 miles from Guam and will soon be out of their radar surveillance range. From that point, the flight no longer appears on any radar, but maintains radio contact with IFSS. 13:33 GMT. The aircraft reaches an altitude of 18,000 ton FT. The captain begins his routine transmission. He announces that everything is fine, weather conditions are normal, the aircraft has fuel for 8 hours and 12 minutes of flight, and the estimated time of arrival in Manila remains the same. Approximately 4 hours and 27 minutes after takeoff, a message is sent from the aircraft. We are currently at 13 degrees 40 minutes north and 140 degrees 0 minutes east. Immediately, the aircraft disappears. It vanishes from the radar without leaving any trace, and no more radio communications are received. Approximately 10 minutes before the super constellation is supposed to make the next routine call, Guam IFSS encounters some radio communication issues with another aircraft. FT-739 does not initiate the routine call to communicate its data. Silence. 15:39 GMT. Guam IFSS initiates a radio call to FT-739, but nothing. No one responds. Total silence. Guam raises the alarm. Hong Kong, Manila, California, and Guam all try to contact the aircraft crew, but nothing. It's the middle of the night, and for 90 minutes, all calls to FT-739 have been completely unsuccessful. The time for the report, and the control tower hopes the crew will contact them. But again, there is complete silence. At this point, they are not too worried. Perhaps the radio transmission was just lost. The aircraft has not yet passed the estimated landing time and still has enough fuel. The estimated landing time. There is no sign of the super constellation on the runway in Manila. A special search team is formed. The aircraft still has fuel for 3 more hours. But where to search? FT-739 was over the ocean, certainly out of the radar range of Guam ATC. But where was it? The distance between the last contact point and Manila was vast, and it was completely dark outside. There is still hope, though. No sign of the plane. According to the data, this is the moment when the super constellation ran out of fuel. FT-739 is officially declared missing. Remember I told you earlier to imagine working on an oil tanker and seeing a streak of an aircraft in the sky, an explosion, and then nothing? Well, that is the only probable clue about FT-739. I say probable because we do not know exactly if what the worker on the oil tanker saw was the L-1049 aircraft exploding. It was 16:00 GMT when the worker on the oil tanker saw the aircraft. Keep this time in mind for the discussion we will have shortly about the investigation tracks. The oil tanker searched the ocean for 5.5 hours in the area indicated by their radar for the fallen object, and during all this time, they failed to contact anyone from the Coast Guard. After all this time, the captain of that vessel decided to turn back and continue their route to Manila. They thought it was probably a military exercise and they were wasting their resources. The oil tanker turned back, and at 21:05 GMT they finally made contact with the control tower of the company operating the oil transport. The captain reported what had happened, and immediately the search team constituted for FT-739 was notified. As you can imagine, the American Army is on alert, and within minutes they mobilize over 100-300 individuals, military planes, 20 ships, and numerous private aircraft. Within 48 hours, no one less than J.F. Kennedy orders the start of the largest search mission ever undertaken at sea. Using the coordinates where the ship had located the fallen object, the search teams established a perimeter. over 190,000 square meters of ocean surface were searched. On March 23, 1962, after 8 days of searching, the American president officially declares that the search has been halted. The aircraft is declared missing. There is no wreckage, no floating objects, not even a vest. No debris was found, no human bodies were discovered, nothing at all. The plane is officially considered lost without a trace, and 107 people are declared missing. No trace of FT-739. Absolutely no clue besides the testimony of the person on the ship, which anyway could not be 100% associated with the lost flight. The American Army completely closed the case and stopped the searches, stating that if no clues had been found by then, there was no chance anyone could still be alive. If you are wondering why some sources list the disappearance of the plane on March 16, 1962, it is due to the time zone difference, which is why in such cases we use the Universal Time Unit GMT. So, it is not wrong if you discover that the plane disappeared on March 16th and not March 15. Things could not stay like this. You couldn't simply tell the families of the missing people, "That's it, bad luck." Thus, the American Civil Aviation Committee opened an investigation. What happened to FT-739? The main theories. First of all, before talking about any theory, we need to discuss the issues that arise in the story of the witness on the oil tanker. There is a gap, a missing time that makes the investigators even more questioning. At 15:30 GMT, the routine call should have been made. At 15:39 GMT, Guam IFSS tries to contact FT-739, 16 SOM GMT. The witness on the oil tanker claims to have seen the explosion. So why couldn't IFSS contact the super constellation if it was still in the air during the contact attempts? We will immediately go through the theories and see what the investigators say. Theory 1. The missile. Given that it was during a war, the possibility of a missile attack could not be ruled out. Although the flight was secret, it was not known that there were soldiers on board. The witness on the oil tanker says he saw 2 burning objects falling into the water after the explosion, one larger and one smaller. So, it could have been the aircraft and the missile. Then where are the missile remains, the aircraft debris? The absence of any wreckage gradually leads to the negation of this theory. In fact, it is neither denied nor confirmed. But it is clear that if it had been a missile, first of all, someone had revealed the secret flight, and secondly, there should have been wreckage, pieces of the missile, any component. But it seems that FT-739 simply vanished, as if it had been swallowed by the earth, as nothing could be found even in the ocean. Theory 2. Sabotage. The possibility that the flight was hijacked or blown up from the inside with explosives was obviously considered. However, the aircraft flew from American airbase to American airbase. That is, secure, monitored zones accessible only to people from the American Air Force. The only time someone could have introduced explosives on board FT-739 was mentioned in the earlier timeline, if you remember. At the Guam Air Base, after refueling, the plane was left alone on the runway, completely unsupervised, for 15 minutes. Coincidentally, the Guam base is not that fenced. It is not too difficult for someone to infiltrate the base, especially if no one is around. That could have been the moment when someone placed the explosives on the aircraft. And yet, that someone would have had to know in advance that the aircraft would be left alone, and when it would happen. Theory 3. Technical failure. It is unlikely that anyone knew exactly when the plane would be left alone in Guam, but it is not to be ignored that a real malfunction could have occurred on the plane. It is already known that the plane encountered problems twice with engines 1 and 3, both on the way from California to Honolulu and from Honolulu to Wake Island. So just because the plane did not report any issues on the flight between Wake and Guam does not mean that after taking off from Guam, problems couldn't reappear. The witness on the oil tanker said he saw a streak in the sky and then the explosion. Above the ocean, in the tropical climate, chemtrails do not form. So that streak seen by the witness could have been a smoke trail. The plane could have been leaking fuel. The engines caught fire, and it simply exploded on its own. What I haven't told you yet is that the twin flight of FT-739, namely FT-78116, also an L-1049H, full of American soldiers with the highest training, took off from the same runway in California, but with the destination of Japan. Why is this flight important? Well, its first refueling stop was supposed to be in Alaska. Everything went smoothly until almost landing. At the last contact, FT-78116 began to lose altitude and received 7 warning messages from the control tower that it was flying too close to the runway, but it was too late. FT-78116 did not respond, and 100 meters before entering the runway, it hit the rocks with the landing gear. Fortunately, being very close to the base, help arrived in time, and although the aircraft caught fire, only one soldier lost his life. So FT-739 was not the first American aircraft on a secret mission that did not reach its destination. Did the United States close the case in just 8 days because they did not want to publicly admit that they were responsible for the loss of the 107 people? Theory 4. Manifest. Or maybe we are being too conspiratorial, and FT-739 was simply struck by lightning. Indeed, there was some lightning below it when it left Guam, but the witness on the oil tanker says he did not see any lightning in the sky, neither before nor after the explosion he saw. This possibility was also considered because of the FT-891 flight of the same company, which in 1959, shortly after takeoff from Milan Airport, was struck by lightning, just like in Manifest, only that this flight was destroyed, along with the passengers on board. Theory 5. Cover-up. There is also a theory that couldn't be ignored. America staged the disappearance of FT-739 to keep the mission completely secret. Because yes, it makes sense. You take a secret flight full of soldiers and ammunition and pretend to blow it up. You make a big fuss on a global scale, so the entire planet knows that you lost a flight full of well-trained soldiers. Thus, the secret mission is no longer that secret. Then, if the US was already avoiding admitting its involvement in the Vietnam War, why make it public now that it lost a plane with soldiers heading to South Vietnam? You might think it was a kind of hiding the flight in plain sight. But if the US had already made the information public, including photos of the crew that appeared in the press of the time, do you think China or Russia would have missed the opportunity to expose the soldiers supposedly coming in secret? If any of those on the plane had been caught on Vietnamese territory, do you think they wouldn't have immediately come out in the press to say that America had lied? How do you hide a plane and 107 people so well? After all this fuss, with theories both conspiratorial and logical, about a year later, the US Civil Aviation Authority closed the case. In the file, the probable cause of FT-739's disappearance is stated as an explosion. The cause of the explosion is specified as unknown. To this day, information regarding Flying Tiger Line 739 remains classified. Perhaps the causes are known, but we still don't have access to the information. Or maybe they don't know either and don't want to embarrass themselves by admitting they have no clue about the cause of the most controversial disappearance in aviation history. Oh, I almost forgot. A while later, a ship reported seeing a mattress floating in the sea about 40 miles from the US Army's search area. That's it. No further questions were asked by anyone.
Into skies they soared high. No one knew the reason why. Through the clouds the plane did fly. Whispers low, a silent sigh.